People are rallying, hoping to put a stop to sex offender transfers off McNeil Island. It's a story we've been tracking for weeks after the Department of Health and Human Services said 5 of these worst of the worst predators would be moving to Tenino.
The Spotlight brought to you by Beacon Plumbing.
Good evening and welcome to the Spotlight. The Tenino home sits empty of SVPs, sexually violent predators, for now. But as the Spotlight's Alejandra Guzman tells us, these sorts of facilities are already found all over our state, and nearby residents aren't always told who's going to be living inside.
Parents clinging on to their children's hands are among the dozens of residents protesting in Enumclaw and Tenino.
We love our kids.
It's kids. It's our whole families.
I feel angry. I feel scared.
Don't surprise any more neighborhoods. Don't put any more children or women in danger of assault.
A real fear for Paula Hagan, who lives just across the street from a less restrictive alternative, LRA community housing in Enumclaw.
Were you ever made aware that this was happening?
Nope.
An issue many say has been their biggest concern, not knowing what is happening in their communities.
He's in our neighborhood. He is seeing our children. We're how many feet away from a bus stop?
The bus stop is just right here.
Yeah.
It's just right here.
Several neighbors say they've spent thousands of dollars adding to their home security systems and installing more lights to keep an eye on who comes on and off their property.
While this first man is a child molester, who's to say what the next 4 or 5 men are? For all we know, they're women is their target. So how do you think that makes me feel? Because I live in that house by myself.
Not only are residents dealing with a new sense of insecurity, they say their home property values are dipping as a result.
What about us? What about all these people here that are unable to live normal lives now because he's been plopped here in the middle of a rural community?
The LRA community housing looks like your average home right next door. There are 12 in Pierce County, 7 in King County. Snohomish and Spokane each have 3. Thurston and Kitsap have 2 each, and there's 1 in Walla Walla. Only 4 are contracted through the Department of Social and Health Services. Those are in King, Pierce, Thurston, and Kitsap counties. The others are contracts between the provider and the court.
I think that there is another way, and it's currently available, and it's McNeil Island, and that's where they should be.
There are currently 131 sexually violent predators, SVPs, on McNeil Island. DSHS stresses that McNeil Island isn't a prison, and these individuals have a right to a yearly evaluation to see if they meet the criteria to be transferred to an LRA. However, victims of sexual abuse say their release and placement is harder on them as they try to overcome the abuse.
And it terrifies me because it is stepping on not only mine, but their traumas, that this is okay. He could come back to the community, that what they experienced doesn't mean anything.
Placements have been happening since the 90s, according to Governor Jay Inslee's office, who sent us this statement saying in part, quote, SB 5163 aimed to prevent 1 or 2 communities from having to absorb all those placements, particularly of individuals who aren't from there. The bill was passed during the 2021-2022 legislative session.
We are actually calling on the governor to use his executive authority.
Representative Jan Griffey helped sponsor House Bill 1813 and 1734, which would look at LRA sightings and help improve community outreach while putting a moratorium on releases.
The indications we've had is, thank you for sending me your bill concept ideas, and that's about it. However, I think, the governor can step up the plate and do more.
Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office assuring Fox 13 McNeil Island is not closing, saying in part, the Attorney General's office is committed to ensuring that all individuals who are diagnosed as sexually violent predators remain civilly committed at McNeil Island. We want 8 SVP trials in 2022. The AG did not support SB 5163, but it passed with bipartisan support.
This is an issue that's going to affect a lot of people in Washington state. It's not a rural versus urban issue. It's not a them versus us issue. This is an issue for everyone. It can happen in your neighborhood.
DSHS says currently 62 SVPs are on conditional release at an LRA. This is the number of people ordered for a conditional release over the last 5 years. Right now, 3 civilly committed residents have tentative release dates to an LRA. 2 more have orders to be released, but no date has been set. Others are released unconditionally, meaning they are no longer considered sexually violent predators, but are still registered as level 3 sex offenders. 10 unconditional release trials are scheduled to happen over the next year. A total of 29 people have been committed to McNeil Island in the last 5 years.
It's scary because you just know what's going to come next from this, and that the state and these programs are allowing more victims like me to come out of this with lifelong trauma.
I can certainly understand the fear that all these neighbors have. Can you tell us where these homes are located, other than the two that you've already spotlighted tonight?
No, David, we can't. I mean, we did push for this information from DSHS. As you saw, they did give us the counties where each of these homes are located, but they pushed back saying that they're concerned not only for the staff, but also for the residents who live there. The home in Tenino was shot at least 6 times. Well, it's unclear if anybody was inside. They say that this is a huge concern for them.
There's obviously a lot of strong emotions here. Do these neighborhoods where these homes are located seem paralyzed to you?
They are. These communities have come to a standstill. They say that their entire lives have changed. Their daily routines, things as simple as opening their blinds, they stopped doing it. Women who love to go outside and mow their lawn, tend to their garden, they're no longer doing that. Children who used to play in their playgrounds can no longer do that safely, at least in their point of view.
All right, Alejandra, thank you. This isn't just a case of not in my backyard. Since January, our reporting on the Tenino home for sex offenders has found numerous flaws in how owner Supreme Living LLC was setting up the operation. The nondescript home on 140th Avenue looks like any other property with 15 acres and some wooden fencing. You might even think this was a horse ranch. Its true purpose wasn't widely known until a few weeks prior to its scheduled opening. It certainly came as a surprise to the former property owners who testified against it and Supreme Living at this packed public hearing on January 17th.
My husband and I actually were the original owners of the home that they purchased and told us that they were going to be fostering children, and then later found out that their intent was not to do that.
But that wasn't all. The Thurston County Sheriff spoke up and spoke out against opening the facility. He pointed out that there are no fences or armed patrols planned at the treatment center. He also said the State Department of Corrections had only recently been made aware of Supreme Living's operation. In the end, it wasn't the public outrage or the sheriff's statement that put a stop to this, at least temporarily. The Thurston County Council filed a cease and desist letter until the home meets with code compliance requirements. But all this fear and anger begs the question, why are the worst of the worst offenders being released into the community in the first place? The answer starts with remembering that these people have served their prison time. Post-sentence, sexually violent predators are civilly committed. It's still an involuntary and total confinement, but this time they're living at McNeil Island instead of in a prison cell. The Special Commitment Center there is for observation and intense mental health treatment. But the state Supreme Court has ruled even the worst predator has a right to petition for release from McNeil once a year. And if a court finds that they've made enough progress, they're moved off the island and into a less restrictive but still supposedly secure alternative, like the Tenino facility.
McNeil Island is not a prison, but it is still a treatment facility. Residents don't come there and remain there indefinitely.
The Department of Social and Health Services and the Department of Corrections held this virtual town hall earlier this month for concerned neighbors in Tenino, where officials explained the safeguards they put in place to keep the residents from harming others again.
We have never had a resident on conditional release be convicted of a reoffense, of a hands-on reoffense.
Does this still not put you at ease?
No, it does not.
Offenders on McNeil Island are said to be diagnosed with mental abnormalities that make them likely to reoffend. Transferring to less restrictive alternative housing is a court-ordered continuation of their treatment and rehabilitation after a forensic evaluation that could lead to their reintegration into society. And if Supreme Living LRA in Tenino does get to open, residents moved there from McNeil Island would be watched around the clock.
I'm not going to be put at ease. If anything, I am more now vigilant than I was before. And I think all of us are after this meeting tonight.
We will keep our families safe by whatever means necessary.
It's worth noting that the speakers decided to make that meeting virtual after concerns for their safety. The Thurston County Sheriff said state officials and Supreme Living executives had received death threats over the Tenino LRA. Another complaint heard time and time again was residents feeling like they'd been blindsided by the announcement that Supreme Living was bringing these offenders into their community. That at least is something that can be changed. 2 lawmakers have been among those leading the charge to establish a longer lead time for local residents and law enforcement to prepare for one of these LRAs setting up in their backyard. They each spoke with the Spotlight about their goals for future legislation.
After the Supreme Court ruled that people had civil liberties and a constitutional right to petition the court to get off of McNeil Island, my community was one of the first to have housing placed there. The small town of Poulsbo, the folks in Poulsbo were as unhappy as anybody is today in other communities when the home just appeared. There was no notice. It was, I think, the 3rd or 4th placement when the community found out what was going on in their neighborhood.
We've introduced legislation that would require that when these less restrictive housing units are going to be placed somewhere, that there has to be notice given to the community, to law enforcement, to public officials, and that has to be advertised in your normal media outlets in that community so that folks have an opportunity to learn more about it and what the situation is, to be able to ask questions and challenge the situation perhaps. And it's got to be at least 14 days, not the day before something's going to be going forward. So this bill is just really to provide more transparency. In today's age, we hear that all the time, government needs to be more transparent. Well, that goes for our contractors too that we use at the state level. We contract this out to to a for-profit business, but that should not absolve them from being transparent about what they're doing. And what happened in Tenino, they were not transparent at all.
Any effort we can make, any advance we can make in the system that we set up a couple of years ago, I'm happy to be a part of. Making sure that if there is a loophole, we close it. If there's weaknesses, we fix them.
We're not done with shining the spotlight on this process yet. We're going out to McNeil Island for one-on-one interviews with the officials in charge about the balance between a patient's civil rights and the public's right to safety. That's next time on the Spotlight. But up next in this episode, we're taking you to Olympia to get an update on one of the most contentious issues this legislative session, changing the rules for police pursuits. Welcome back. Washington lawmakers have taken another step towards giving police officers more freedom to chase suspects. While House Bill 1363 still won't allow officers to pursue car thieves, it does broaden the rules for other crimes and give them fewer restrictions while doing so. The Spotlight's A.J. Janavel was in Olympia for this must-pass vote that kept the legislation alive.
Wednesday, 7 in the morning, Covington. A thief in a stolen Kia uses the car as a battering ram to smash through a new business owner's front window. Inside, video captures the crook tossing carton after carton of cigarettes into the vehicle. But then, a glimmer of hope for the business owner, already facing thousands in losses from the theft and damages. But the thief just drives around the deputies, escaping on Highway 18. 2 years ago, officers could have pursued in this case, but current Washington state law prevents that kind of action. House Bill 1363 looks to walk back some of the restrictions for when officers can chase. Officers still would not be able to chase in burglaries like this one, but they would have more freedom and flexibility of when they could go after alleged bad guys.
We've learned some things since the bill originally passed, so I'm open to those ideas. But obviously I can't sign a bill that doesn't get to my desk. So I hope legislators will continue to discuss that. I hope some bill can get to my desk.
Last week, the bill passed a subcommittee in an 8-1 vote. Lawmakers, as well as city leaders and law enforcement, voicing their hope this bill will go through, but there's still a long way to go. And some, like former Seattle City Council member and current legislative director for the ACLU of Washington, Lorena Gonzalez, want to put the brakes on the pursuit bill.
Vehicle pursuits are adrenaline-charged, dangerous tactics that oftentimes result in the death of not only those being pursued, but even officers who are in pursuit. If more time is needed to collect more data, then certainly that would lead us to support a bill that is designed to study this before policies are enacted.
That opposition is led by State Senator Manka Dhingra, the chair of the Law and Justice Committee, who has refused to let a companion version of this bill come up for a hearing. As we reported right here on the Spotlight, she's used some questionable data to support her position that the current policy is saving lives Instead, she's offered a new bill calling for more study of police pursuits that would create a model policy statewide during the next session. Turning now to police stops, a bill drastically reducing the reasons an officer can pull you over was also passed by the Transportation Committee to the full House for a vote. House Bill 1513 would prevent police from stopping you for most kinds of non-moving violations like expired tabs, a cracked windshield, or a broken taillight, unless it presents an immediate safety hazard. Bill supporters say the legislation would refocus police on major safety threats like DUIs and road rage incidents, while minimizing unnecessary escalations of force.
This bill does not decriminalize any act. The acts would still be crimes. What we hope to do with this bill is to have fewer interactions so that law enforcement can get home safely to their family and so that those on the road also have that opportunity. Please vote yes.
Motorists would still be ticketed for these offenses so long as they get pulled over for another reason like speeding. But the Washington State Patrol says those low-level stops continue to serve an important purpose. Their records show 8% of DUIs between 2018 and 2022. More than 5,000 arrests originated from nonviolent violations. When we return, we're taking you back under the Ship Canal Bridge for a major change in the official approach to removing homeless camps on WashDOT's right-of-ways. Last time on the Spotlight, we focused on the frustration surrounding the spread of homeless camps on state land. In particular, the hundreds of tent towns that have sprung up on WashDOT highway right-of-ways. The Ship Canal Bridge camp had gotten so big and so dangerous that the governor stepped in. But even with Inslee's backing, neighbors were told that under the state funding contract for sweeps on WashDOT property, the campers had to be moved to permanent housing, and that could take months. So could that really be true, especially since dozens of temporary shelter beds have been sitting empty all around Seattle? To figure it out, we tracked down the lawmaker who helped write the contract, and he told us those housing officials got it all wrong.
The problem is that even though we've provided the resources, the amount of camps that are actually being physically cleaned up is not happening. And I don't believe it's happening at the level that the people of the state of Washington want or are demanding as these things explode. The most telling statistic is that they've cleaned up maybe 11 or 12 camps, but in that same time frame, over 200, 250 more have shown up. So we're going backwards in this, not forward. As I wrote that original proviso, what it specifically says is that they have to be given alternative forms of housing that are not in the right of way, which kind of is silly, but it makes sense, right? And that is shelter, that's congregate shelter, that could be permanent housing, that could be treatment, that could be all sorts of different things that they could use in order to do that. But I think the bottom line is we want to encourage the people to be moved out of these incredibly bad situations into shelter. And from there, if they move to permanent supportive housing or treatment or other pathways to getting them onto the road to recovery or whatever it is, that is the methodology that was always the intent behind this program. And what I'm seeing from what is now happening from the governor's office and others is reactionary. It has to get so bad, right? It has to get so bad where people are getting murdered, where you have the drugs, where you have it affecting communities and schools and everything else, that finally people will rise up and say enough is enough. But we shouldn't be in a reactionary mode when everything was designed to be proactive to get these things taken care of.
Next up, a Good Samaritan who wasn't good at all. This crook victimized an elderly lady in distress, but you can help catch him. Tonight, we're putting the spotlight on a despicable crime. An 85-year-old woman gets her car stuck in the heavy snow and ice we had back in December. She was so grateful when a man came along and then offered to help her move her car out of her driveway. There's one problem. He was no Good Samaritan at all. And now Mountain Lake Terrace police are asking for your help to identify him. Take a look at this video. Detectives say that man with the peroxide blonde hair checking out at Bartell's is using the elderly woman's credit card. She realized after she got her car stuck that her card was missing. Police say the suspect stole it from inside her vehicle while he was moving her car out of the roadway. The store surveillance video is from right before Christmas, December 23rd, and he went on quite the shopping spree. She had numerous charges for more than $1,400, and more than half of that was just spent at Bartell's. You can see his cart is loaded up. If you recognize him, if you know his name, Crime Stoppers will pay you a cash reward of up to $1,000. Text the information anonymously through the P3 Tips app on your cell phone. People ask me all the time for advice on when they can use deadly force to defend themselves, though they usually just put it more simply and ask, when can I legally shoot someone? Well, the answer is that you can use deadly force if you reasonably believe that you or someone else is in danger of being killed or seriously injured. A perfect case example happened recently in Sammamish when 4 masked men broke into a home in the middle of the night and started shooting. The homeowner's son shot back when they kicked in his bedroom door, hitting one of the suspects several times in the back. Unfortunately, he was also shot 5 times and is still recovering. Meanwhile, neighbors say they're worried, and many have cameras set up.
It's scary to hear that somebody has to defend their family with a gun, and people can just break the door and, barge in.
Investigators say the named suspect, Ricky Haynes, was dropped off at the hospital 20 minutes after the shooting. He had several gunshot wounds to his back, claiming he'd been shot in his sleep. The 3 other intruders are still on the run. If you have any information, contact the King County Sheriff's Office. And now an update on a fugitive with $1 million warrant that we featured right here on the Spotlight last time. Gary Moyer had numerous felony warrants in Kitsap County for his arrest for burglary and for trying to steal an ATM using a stolen truck. Detectives say putting him in the spotlight drove Moyer out of state, but he quickly discovered there was nowhere left to hide. Gig Harbor Police worked with Oregon State Police and the Eugene Police SWAT team to arrest him on Wednesday. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. If you have a tip or an idea for our next episode, leave it on the Spotlight page at fox13seattle.com. You can also call our Spotlight tip line. The number is on your screen, 206-674-1765. Until next time, be smart and stay safe.